This is a really cool boutique steel frame bike made in Portland, Oregon. It's called the Speedvagen. These are made to be really lightweight race bikes. This one's in really good shape. It's really clean. It has some nice lines and indescript branding. It's pretty fun. It does need a few things. As you can see, there's no tape here, so we're gonna replace that. These tires are a little bit dried out and worn, so we're gonna replace the front and rear. They both have dry rot cracking going on in them. The biggest issue though is this chain has not been replaced at a regular interval, so it's way past normal stretch. Oh baby, that's bad. There's many tools out there to check chain length. I've gone with the CC4 from Park Tool just because it's a longer tool, so you kind of get a more accurate measurement of how much a chain is stretched. Basically, we'll put this end in the chain and squeeze here, and depending on how far this goes down, it kind of tells us how much it's been worn. There's a nice guide here to see. That goes all the way in without stopping, so that tells me that chain is just beyond maximum stretch. It's stretched so much that it itself has actually worn the chainring and the cassette to the point where they are going to need replacement as well. If we put a new chain on this system with the amount of stretch that's gone in, it's not going to shift well because the new chain is going to be trying to mesh with the shifting parts of the cassette and the chainring here, and it's just not going to be very smooth, and we're going to get a lot of slipping. We're not going to replace the derailleurs. They're still going to be in great shape, but these main wear points like the cogs here and the chainring, you really have to do it to get it to shift well. Sometimes we even have to go as far as changing the pulley wheels if they're worn, but they look pretty decent, so they'll probably still function well with this bike. But aside from that, it's a really, really clean, beautiful bike.
So for this one, I think I'm gonna go for the low-hanging fruit first and go ahead and get this chainring replaced. Grab my replacement parts. This can be done without taking the cranks off of the bike, but since we're here in the full service shop, it's easy enough to go ahead and undo these. Quick visual inspection just to make sure the spindle and everything looks good. Shimano chainrings have a direct mount to the chainring bolt, so there's only one on the inside, and it's going to be a T30 from the factory. Go ahead and break the bolts loose here, all four of them. The primary factor for wear, you just want to look for, especially on modern chainrings, they're usually going to have an anodized layer. So the first sign that it's going to be a little bit worn is if there's some silver showing through. The anodizing is usually pretty strong. So cassette chain ring wear is going to show up with that paint missing. And then we also look for what we consider a shark tooth profile. So the leading edge of the chainring tooth is actually going to be curved forward, just like a shark fin, just from the chain pressing into it over time. And in this case, when you look really close, you can actually see that there's a small edge at the very tip of the chainring as well, where there's a sharp bit of metal. And sometimes, especially if the previous riders cross-chained a lot, so riding with an extreme chain angle, the chainring teeth will actually get really thin. So they really start feeling like a saw blade when you put your finger over it. These ones aren't too bad as far as that goes, but the shark toothing on them is pretty severe. We can tell though that we don't need to do the inner chainring. This one actually looks like it's been barely used. There's hardly any paint missing, and the chainring teeth are still a very even profile, especially when you compare it to the large chainring. I always just like to double check. Shimano is very particular about what chainrings you use and what combos. So I always just like to double check that they match. This one's supposed to be for a 53-39 combo, and that appears to be what we have. So we should be good to go. Get the inner chainring oriented correctly. It's not strictly necessary on Shimano chainring bolts, but I do like to apply just a little bit of grease. I'm just gonna get started and thread it in to line everything up. I'm not gonna torque them down just yet though. So I've got them all in, I can progressively tighten them down. I do like to go for a little bit of a cross pattern. It's kind of hard to do with a 4-bolt. That just keeps everything a little bit straighter. Apply applies the torque a little more evenly. The trick is to get them snug without being too tight. That's all there is to it. Now we can go ahead and re-grease this and put it back in there. This is another stage where it's important just to have a little bit of sensitivity. You need this to be snug, but not tight. The idea here, again, is just to keep everything together, remove any play, and preload the bearings if they require it. In this case, Chris King does use an angular contact bearing. So you want a little bit more pressure, a little bit more tension on these ones than you would on a more standard plain bearing, just to get that preload set into place, get the bearings tensioned properly. With nothing on it, we're looking for a good rotation, rotation and a half. No binding and no tight spots. It should just spin evenly all the way around. So now that we're looking good there, go ahead and tighten the pinch bolts. Up next now, we can go ahead and take care of the wheels. The hubs have a little bit of play here, so we need to at least adjust them, if not do a minor overhaul. I'll go ahead and kill two birds with one stone on this one and do the rear wheel first, since we are replacing the cassette. Since I'm checking the bearings here, I'm gonna go ahead and remove the QR skewer. Go ahead and remove our old cassette. A lot of people are familiar with the old chain whip, which we do have. Personally, I like this Pedro's Vice Whip. Just locks everything into place here nice and securely. So I don't have to worry about that as I go after the lock ring. There's no chance the Vice Whip's gonna slip off with the cogs. A little visual inspection back here since the hub is loose. With the Chris King hubs, one of the advantages of them is they use really high quality pressed in bearings that are usually nearly lifetime as long as you take care of it. That is the one trick. A lot of high-end components, you can be lulled into the false sense of that it's high-end, it's nice, it's durable, so you don't actually need to service them. In some cases, Chris King is a good example of that. They're actually relatively maintenance intense, but they are gonna last you a really long time without having to actually replace anything as long as you maintain them. So in this case, there was too much play here, and I can feel that the bearing is a little bit tight, even though there's all that play. So I am actually going to go ahead and disassemble it and give it a small overhaul. So here we can just do a little visual inspection. We can see inside here. It might be a little hard to see on camera, but it is looking a little dirty, a little dry. There's a lot of built up grease and road dirt around the outside of that bearing. So this one really isn't too bad. Sometimes when I see these, the bearings can feel a little bit notchy and there might be a lot of built up dirt inside. Sometimes it looks like they don't even have any lubricant left inside of the bearings. This one actually does. It's got some good grease and everything around it. It just hasn't been serviced in a moment, so it is a little dirty. So what we're gonna wanna be doing here is just cleaning out all the dirt, flushing out these bearings, and putting a new layer of grease inside of them. Chris King actually recommends motor oil inside of their bearings. I can't remember the exact, I think it's like 30 weight Mobil 1 or something in their tech docs. The idea is you just want something pretty lightweight and not a full grease inside of their bearings, just because their tolerances are so tight, and actually the seals are good enough. You don't need the full weight. So I like to use Dumontech liquid grease inside of them. I find that works pretty well since we don't tend to keep a lot of motor oil in here. When some of the bearings are really bad and really crusty and gross, I will actually use some speed degreaser or other non-citrus based degreaser and flush the bearings out. These ones are looking really good, but they're just a little bit dry on lubricant. So I'm just pulling the seals off and again, putting some more fresh grease inside of here. Most modern hubs these days are actually going to be using just a standard industrial sealed cartridge hub bearing, much like your bottom brackets. This is ease of use, ease of manufacture. The idea there is that You just run the bearing until it's used up, and then you replace the whole unit instead of doing an overhaul on the existing components. These Chris King bearings are kind of a hybrid between the two in that they are serviceable. If you maintain them properly, you don't actually need to replace the unit, but they are still press fit inside the frame instead of using a more traditional old school cup and cone system. So there's the axle and the free hub done. So now we're going to move on to the main hub shell bearings here. Our procedure on these is going to be exactly the same. Just cleaning off the dirt from inside. This is the drive side, so this has the ring drive mechanism inside of it. Kind of similar if you know how the DT Swiss bearing system works. It is a very similar system to that. And the one difference is that Chris King has developed a helical spline on the inside so that as you pedal, it actually squeezes the drive mechanism together more firmly. So the idea is that you'll never have any slip. So the more power you put down, the stronger it is locked together. All right, I got fresh grease in all of the bearings. They're looking good, clean. My last step is going to be reassembling the axle and free hub unit onto the bike. And then now I will go ahead and put this up in our truing stand. A little bit quicker and easier than putting it back in the bike to test to make sure that there is no play remaining. And the idea here is I really want this to only be as snug as it needs to be. So I'll actually back it off just a little bit. You see that now there's a little bit of play, so I'll give it another 1/8 of a turn. I can feel it snug back up and there's no more play. So I can tighten this back down. And once again, give it a spin, make sure nothing's binding, and listen to that nice Chris King buzz. And go ahead and now also install our new cassette. Install the lock ring by hand to start with. Make sure you don't cross thread it. Once we've got that started, we can go ahead and lock it on down with our Crombie. And for now, we're gonna go ahead and hang this back up. So I did the same thing to the front hub as I did to the rear. It also had some play. Now we got both of those buttoned up, got the bearings refreshed. We'll go ahead and reinstall the wheels, do a final check on the drivetrain to make sure nothing's out of the ordinary, and send it on the line for all of the final adjustments. Give it another wiggle now that I'm in the bike. So we're looking good, the bearings look smooth. Once again, we've got that really nice telltale Chris King buzz. One final detail, this is actually getting a brand new chain. Since this one still has the old chain on it, I'm gonna go ahead and remove it for them so that they don't have to deal with it. Important to note, this is metal recycling. Try to eliminate as much waste as we can in this building. That includes recycling as many metal parts as we can.